In May 2005, a group of high school graduates arrived in Aruba for what was supposed to be a celebration trip. It was a warm Caribbean island filled with resorts, beaches, and late-night parties. Among them was an 18-year-old student named Natalee Holloway. Within days, she would disappear without a trace. On her last night, she was seen leaving a popular nightclub with 3 men. She never returned to her hotel. The next morning, her friends realized she was missing. Her passport, phone, and belongings were still in her room. No confirmed sightings followed after that night. What began as a missing persons case quickly turned into an international investigation. Search teams combed beaches, hotels, and nearby waters. But Natalee Holloway was never found, and the truth about that night remains unresolved. Natalee Holloway was an 18-year-old high school senior from Alabama. She had just graduated and was preparing to begin college later that year. Friends described her as responsible, social, and well-liked. To celebrate graduation, her school organized a trip to Aruba. It was a supervised trip with dozens of students and adult chaperones. The island was known for its safety and tourist-friendly environment. For many of the students, it was their first trip outside the United States. The group stayed at a well-known resort along the beach. Days were spent by the pool, on the sand, and exploring local attractions. At night, many of the students visited nearby bars and clubs. The atmosphere was relaxed, with little concern for danger. Parents trusted that their children would be safe in such a location. Natalee was active throughout the trip, spending time with friends. She followed the same routine as the rest of the group. Nothing about her behavior suggested any risk or concern during the early days. The trip appeared to be unfolding as planned. Chaperones reported no major incidents among the students. Everything about the environment suggested normalcy. No one expected that this trip would end in a disappearance, and no one imagined that Natalee would never return home. By the final night of the trip, the group gathered for one last evening out. Many of the students went to a popular nightclub in the hotel district. The atmosphere was loud, crowded, and fast-moving. Natalee spent the evening with friends, moving between the dance floor and bar area. Witnesses later described her as relaxed and social. As the night progressed, smaller groups began to form. Some students started leaving earlier to return to the hotel. Natalee remained at the nightclub into the early hours of the morning. At some point, she was seen speaking with 3 local men. They were later identified as Joran van der Sloot and 2 brothers. Security footage from nearby areas placed them outside together. Shortly before closing time, Natalee was seen leaving the nightclub with them. She did not leave with her friends. This moment would become the last confirmed sighting of her. A car was seen departing the area shortly after. Inside the vehicle were Natalee and the 3 men. There was no indication of distress at that moment. No one intervened or reported concern. To those watching, it appeared like a routine end to a night out, but it would mark the beginning of her disappearance. After that point, her movements could not be confirmed. After leaving the nightclub, Natalee Holloway was expected to return to her hotel. Her friends assumed she would arrive shortly after them, but she never appeared back at the resort. By the early morning, concern began to grow among her group. At first, they believed she may have stayed elsewhere for the night, but as hours passed, that explanation became less likely. By late morning, her absence was no longer considered normal. Her friends checked her room and found all her belongings untouched. Her passport was still there. Her phone had not been used. Her clothes and personal items remained exactly as she left them. There was no indication that she had packed or planned to leave. Chaperones were informed that she could not be located. Attempts were made to contact her, but there was no response. The group began searching nearby areas around the hotel. Staff were alerted, and initial inquiries were made. The situation escalated quickly from concern to alarm. Within hours, local authorities were notified. What had started as a delayed return was now treated as a disappearance. Time became a critical factor, and every passing hour reduced the chances of finding clear answers. As the day progressed, search efforts began to expand beyond the hotel. Local authorities initiated coordinated searches across nearby areas. Beaches were combed for any signs of disturbance. Divers were deployed to search shallow coastal waters. Resort staff assisted in checking surrounding properties. The last known location near the nightclub became a primary focus. Investigators began retracing her possible route from that night. Witnesses were interviewed to establish a clearer timeline. Attention quickly turned to the 3 men she was last seen with. They were located and brought in for questioning. Initial statements from them contained inconsistencies. Each version of events differed slightly from the others. They claimed to have dropped her off near the hotel, but no one at the resort reported seeing her return. Surveillance footage did not confirm their claim. No cameras captured her entering the property that night. Search teams expanded into less populated areas of the island. Remote coastal zones and isolated paths were examined. Despite extensive efforts, no physical evidence was found. No belongings, no footprints, no confirmed trail. The investigation was now facing a critical absence of proof. As the investigation intensified, pressure began to build on local authorities. Natalee's family traveled to Aruba to assist in the search. They pushed for answers and demanded more aggressive action. Media coverage quickly expanded beyond the island. International attention brought scrutiny to the case. Investigators re-examined the statements given by the 3 men. Inconsistencies became more difficult to ignore. Timelines did not align with physical evidence. At times, the suspects changed their accounts entirely. Search efforts were expanded again based on new claims. Certain locations were searched multiple times, but each effort produced the same result. There was no physical trace of Natalee. Authorities faced growing criticism for lack of progress. Coordination between agencies became more structured. New leads were pursued, but often led to dead ends. Public interest continued to grow as days passed. Speculation began to replace confirmed information. Despite the increased attention, clarity remained limited. The investigation was moving forward, but without direction, and the absence of evidence continued to define the case. As weeks passed, the case began to rely more heavily on statements and theories. Physical evidence remained almost entirely absent. Investigators focused on reconstructing what may have happened after the nightclub. The accounts from the 3 men became central to the case. One version claimed she was dropped off near her hotel. Another suggested she was left on the beach. Each statement introduced new uncertainty rather than clarity. Search operations adjusted based on these shifting claims. Specific coastal areas were examined repeatedly, but no trace of her was ever recovered. Attention also turned to inconsistencies in behavior after that night. Phone records and movements were analyzed. There were gaps that could not be fully explained. At times, key details were changed or withdrawn entirely. This made it difficult to establish a reliable timeline. Investigators faced the challenge of building a case without evidence. Theories began to emerge about what might have occurred. Some suggested an accident that was concealed. Others pointed toward intentional harm, but none of these theories could be proven. The case remained open, defined by unanswered questions. Months turned into years, and the case remained unresolved. Natalee Holloway was never found. No confirmed evidence ever established what happened that night. The investigation continued across different jurisdictions. Legal proceedings were initiated against key suspects, but without physical evidence, progress remained limited. Statements continued to change over time. At points, partial confessions were suggested, then withdrawn. Authorities pursued every lead that emerged. Some searches were conducted years after the disappearance. Still, no definitive answers were uncovered. The case became one of the most widely known disappearances involving a tourist. It raised questions about safety, accountability, and jurisdiction. Natalee's family continued to seek closure. They pursued legal action and kept public attention on the case. The absence of answers became the central reality. No location was ever confirmed. No timeline was ever fully proven. What happened after she entered that car remains unknown. The final moments of that night were never reconstructed with certainty, and the disappearance of Natalee Holloway remains unsolved.